Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Nick, and this is the second video in a 11-part series titled How to Get Started Investing in Real Estate. The first video I put out, we talked about the education part of real estate, what you need to do as far as educating yourself. I gave you guys several resources that you could go through on your own. Very valuable resources. We talked about how you can educate yourself for free. You don't even have to really spend any money doing that. And so hopefully that has been a benefit to you guys, and it will continue to be a benefit to you. So today's video, we're going to talk about the next step number 2, which is running numbers on a property. And we're going to get into what all that means. But essentially what we're talking about is how to calculate how much it's going to cost to purchase the property, what can you potentially get in rents for it, what are all your expenses going to be, including your rehab expenses, things like that. And essentially what we want to get out of this is when we're looking at properties, we can get a pretty good idea of whether that particular property could potentially be a good investment for you or not. All right, so again, step 2 is going to be about running numbers. And the first thing that I want to go over with you guys is there's a general rule in real estate investing. It's the 1% rule. Some people go by a 2% rule. Just to keep things simple right now, I'm going to go over the 1% rule. And what the 1% rule is when you are looking at properties, right? Let's say you get on an MLS or whatever resource you use to evaluate properties. You look at the price of the property, what they're asking, and you want to figure out, okay, if I wanted to buy this property, would it be a good investment for me? What would the rents be like? What would they look like for this property? How much money am I going to put into this property based on what they're asking? Is this going to be a good investment? And what that does is it allows you to look at it and decide, within a matter of seconds, if not maybe a minute or two, whether that property is worth looking further into or not. It's not a hard rule. It's not something that you go by every time. It's just something you look at. It's a starting point when you look at property. So what does this mean, 1% rule? Well, what it means is when you look at a property, the monthly rents on that property should equal at least 1% of the purchase price plus any rehab expenses. And again, it's not a hard rule. It's just a guide. Again, if the property meets these criteria and the monthly rents equal at least 1% of the purchase price plus any rehab expenses that you might have on the property, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good deal. It just means that, okay, maybe it's worth looking into more. And to be honest, I typically try to go by the 2% rule. There's a lot of investors out there that use the 1% rule, and I think a lot of it depends on the market they're in. Some people are in like California and things like that where properties are very expensive. If they can get 1% on the property, that they're happy with that. But I invest in the New Orleans area, primarily the West Bank, and I typically try to get about 2%. It may not get 2% every time, but I try to get at least close to 2%. So let's look at an example of that. Okay, so what's an example look like? Let's say you're searching MLS and you come across a house. Maybe it's a double, maybe it's a single family home, and it costs $100,000. That's the asking price. And anybody that's been involved in real estate knows that typically you don't even offer the full asking price. But let's just say they're asking $100,000 to start from. All right, and you determine that the rents you could get $1,000 if you were to rent that house out. Let's say you buy it $100,000 and then you turn around and rent it right away for $1,000 a month. That property meets the 1% rule. Now, again, this is a very basic example. This isn't typical because, even if the house costs $100,000, you're going to put more into it than that. You have to at least pay closing costs, which I typically factor in about 3% for that. And then also, if the house needs any work, which typically it needs a little bit, even if it's a good house, you're going to have to put something into it. So you have to factor that in too. So maybe you have to put $5,000 into it renovations. And then let's say you have another $3,000 in closing costs. So right there, that's $108,000. And so if your rents are only $1,000, it doesn't quite meet that 1% rule. All right. And so what you do is you take the rents and you divide it by the total cost of the house plus rehab plus closing costs, et cetera, et cetera. And here we took the $1,000 divided by the $100,000, which is the purchase price of the house, and that gives you 1%. All right, so we're going to move on to the next screen. And what we're looking at now is we're getting more into specifics. So once you, let's say you run your numbers, you look at a property and you're able to determine, okay, if I bought this property at this price, the rents are going to be at this price. This property meets the 1% rule. Maybe you want to dig deeper and you say, okay, let's start evaluating this property. So how do you do that? Well, the way I learned to do it is you basically, you want to basically take a piece of paper or something like that and draw 4 squares on it, 4 quadrants, and you're going to break everything down into 4 quadrants. And so what do I mean by that? Well, quadrant 1 right here is rents and other income. That's going to be all the rent, and any other income that the property could take in. You might say, well, what's other income? Well, a lot of times if you buy a multifamily property, you might have laundry money that comes in. Maybe you have coin-operated laundry machines, just things like that. Some people, they might have a storage shed in the backyard. They'll rent that out for extra income. So, generally it's the rents, but if there's anything else on that property that's generating income, you include that in the first quadrant, okay? The second quadrant is your cash flow, all right? And this is going to be based off of quadrant number 3, where we look at our expenses. And in quadrant number 4, it's going to be your cash on cash return, okay? So let's start here, quadrant 1. The first thing you need to determine is what can your rents and potentially other income be. All right, for this example, I tried to keep it simple. We're going to just determine $1,500 a month, right? So let's look at our expenses on the property. Let's say our property taxes, and again, this is all hypothetical. None of this is actual expenses, but some of it can be pretty close to reality, okay? Let's say property taxes on the property that you're looking into cost $1,000 a year, all right? And a lot of times you can find this information when you pull up the property on a site. Like I use Redfin. I also look at Zillow sometimes, but I primarily use Redfin. It'll show you when you click on the property and you scroll down, it'll show you how much the property taxes are on that property. So that's kind of where you can get that money, that figure from. So let's say in this example, it's $1,000 a year for the whole year, which comes out to be about $85 a month. Okay, I just rounded up a little bit. Property insurance. So for property insurance, for a rental property, you're probably going to want to get a little bit more liability in there, just in case something were to happen and you have a tenant and they decide to try to sue you. So your property insurance is going to be a little bit higher than it would typically be if you were putting it on like your personal residence. So let's just say $3,000 a year. That includes hazard, liability, flood, and this is a pretty realistic number. That comes out to be about $250 a month. Let's say utilities. There's no expense to you because, well, your tenants are going to be paying all the utilities, right? Some properties, they don't. Let's say you buy a double and there's only one water meter that services both units. In fact, I have a couple of properties like that right now. So you can't really charge the tenant for that water, but what you can do is maybe bump rents up just a little bit to make sure you cover the expenses of the water. Okay? So utilities, again, we're not going to get too much into a lot of these, but just want to explain them as I go through them. Homeowners Association fees, HOA fees. We're just going to assume that there are none. Most areas around here don't really have homeowners association fees. You're probably going to find this in newer subdivisions, things like that. Lawn care. Oh, well, if you're not going to cut the grass yourself, you have to hire somebody. Let's say you're paying $100 a month for lawn care. Vacancy, what that means is, there's going to be times when you have a tenant move out, right? Maybe they're finished with their lease and they want to move out and they want to move to a different property, or maybe, unfortunately, this happens sometimes. Maybe you have to evict them. You have to factor in, you have to set aside money for when you do have these vacancies, right? Because you got to realize, there's going to be a month or two every year, potentially, where you're not getting any rent at all because you don't have somebody living in it, right? It might take you a whole month from the time the other tenant moves out to the time that you move another tenant in there. So you have to factor in, man, you're not getting rent during that month. So what do? I typically factor in about 5% vacancy per year on my properties. And what that means is you take 5% of the rent, of the monthly rent, and you save that every month so that when you do have a vacancy, you have a nice cushion in there that you can pull that $1,500 or whatever from to cover your rent for that month. So in this case, 5% of the rent is going to be $75 a month. Okay, next same thing for maintenance repairs. You know, unless you're a slumlord, which hopefully none of you guys will be, because nobody likes slumlords, right? You need to make sure you factor in some money each month to put aside for repairs and maintenance. Now, what does this mean? This means like, you know, maybe you have a stopped up toilet or a stopped up sink, or you know, something goes, you know, you have a repair you have to make. Maybe something breaks. Maybe you got to go in and patch some sheetrock, or, you know, who knows? I mean, there's all kinds of things that you need to do to make sure your property stays maintained and stays in good shape. So what do? I'll put aside, again, 5% of the rent each month. I'll put aside into maintenance and repairs. And again, this all goes into like a savings account or something like that, where it's just building up until you need to pull it out. And then, so that would be $75 a month. And in capital expenses, another 5% is what I factor in. And what are capital expenses? Well, this is, again, you're saving up for bigger repairs that need to be made. Let's say you have to replace your roof one day, right? Because roofs don't last forever. That might cost you $5,000, right? It might cost you more, who knows? But unless you're saving up to go towards that each month, when that roof needs to be replaced, where's that money going to come from? So you have to factor these things into your expenses. You can't just pull this stuff out of thin air when it happens. You can't just hope for the best and say, oh, well, I hope one day, I hope I don't have to make any repairs anytime soon. That's poor management, and those are the things that if you don't factor in, you probably won't succeed in this, in this business. And then two more things: property management. Now, I don't factor this in because I manage my own properties, but if you want to be very hands-off, you don't have time to manage your property, you don't want to put up with the headaches of it, then you need to factor in at least 10%, because that's what most property management companies charge. And again, that's 10% of the rent. So every month, that would be $150 based off of $1,500 rent. And then lastly, your mortgage payments, right? To keep the math simple, I just assumed our mortgage payments are $500 a month on this particular property. And so when you add up all those expenses, our total expenses on this property are $1,310. Okay, so now that we've gotten through what our rents are going to look like and what all our expenses are going to look like, that, to me, those are the hardest parts. Once you get past that, the math is pretty easy after that. So you factor in your rents, and then you factor in your expenses, and to figure out your cash flow, your monthly cash flow, you take your rents and subtract all your expenses from that, and that lets you know, is this property going to cash flow for me? So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So if you look in quadrant number 3, up here, cash flow quadrant, all you're doing is taking the income, the rental income, which is, we've already determined that's $1,500 a month. And then we subtract all our expenses, which we figured out in quadrant number 2, which is $1,310 a month. So $1,500 minus the $1,310, the cash flow for this property is about $190 a month. Okay, and so some people will stop there to say, oh man, I can get this property cash flow $190 a month, which means every month I'm going to put $190 in my pocket after I factor in all my expenses. To me, it's worth it. I think I want to try to buy this property. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's all you're concerned about is cash flow, then great. Now, is $190 a month good cash flow? Well, it depends, and what does it depend on? Well, number one, it depends on your personal preferences. Are you okay with $190 a month of cash flow? How much extra money and time and effort is going to go into this property to generate the $190 a month? If all you're doing is buying it, it needs very minimal work, it's in a good area, you can get good tenants in there quickly, $190 a month might not be bad cash flow. It might actually be pretty good. Some people want to see more cash flow, but some people will be okay with that. Some people will be okay with less cash flow. You know, it really just depends on your personal situation. I'm going to talk about my preferences in just a few minutes, but I want to go ahead and finish the fourth quadrant on this, which is our cash on cash return. Okay, so our last and final quadrant is our cash on cash return, and we're going to talk about what that means, because for me, this is just as important as my cash flow. So what is cash on cash return? Cash on cash return is really just how much of your personal cash are you putting into the property, and what is your return on that going to be, right? Because you would use these same standards if you were to invest, say, in the stock market. If you're putting in, you know, $200 a month, $500 a month in the stock market, you want to make sure you're getting a return on that. If you're only seeing a 2% or 3% or 4% return on that, you're probably not going to invest in the stock market. But if you're seeing, I don't know, 8%, 10%, 12%, you're probably going to realize, man, this is a pretty good investment. I'm going to keep investing in the stock market. So it's the same thing with a rental property. You want to know what your cash on cash return is going to be. What is your return on investment? So in this example, let's say as your down payment, you put $20,000 down, okay? And then your closing costs, let's say, were about $3,000. Let's say you put $10,000 into the rehab to fix it up to get it into tip-top shape. And then let's just say you had another $5,000 of miscellaneous. This could be, you know, fees. This could be you went over your rehab budget. This could be paying the utilities while you're getting it rehabbed. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can go into that. So what's our total cash invested? We took all of these, added them up, and we came out to $38,000 total cash invested. All right, so how do we figure out our cash on cash return in this example? We take our annual cash flow. I have to apologize, guys. I just realized I made a mistake on my chart. When I got to cash on cash return, I had put in the gross rent instead of the cash flow. So I'm going to show you guys what I mean by that. I just had to change that up. So if you were confused earlier, or if you were an experienced investor and you noticed that, I apologize. I didn't pick that up until just now. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what I mean by that, and I'm going to finish this off. And then when I got to our annual cash flow, I had mistakenly put in our rent rather than our actual cash flow. So that was my mistake. I went back and changed it. So what we do is to figure out our annual cash flow, right? That means how much cash flow you have coming in every year. You take this $190, that's a month, multiply it by your 12 months, and that gives you $2,280. That's how much cash flow we can expect in an entire year, okay? And all you do is you take your annual cash flow and you divide it by your cash invested, which was up here, $38,000. So we're going to take our cash flow, annual cash flow, 2,280, divide it by our total cash invested, which is 38,000, and that's going to give us a percent. And in this case, our cash on cash return gives us about a 6% return. So again, this could kind of help take you a step further. When you look at your cash flow and you say, $190, I might be okay with that, I might not. That might be borderline for me. Let me see what my cash on cash return is. And you look and you see, oh, it's 6%. You know, again, you got to decide, is 6% good for you or not? For me, 6% is not good. I would not be okay with this deal because I want to see a much better return. And again, I'm going to go over those numbers in just a minute. But why is this important? Again, it's important because this shows you how much your cash is getting returned. When you take this $38,000, you want to know, man, you know, if I'm only getting a 6% return on it, maybe I want to look at another property that's going to get me a higher return on my cash on cash return, but still give me the same amount of cash flow. Or maybe it'll give me a little bit less cash flow, but my cash on cash return will be much higher. So I'm going to share with you guys what are my personal numbers that I look for, that I go by. And again, this is not for everybody. Like, my personal numbers might be completely different from yours. But I just do this because I like to be transparent. And I like to kind of give you guys, maybe you might want to use this as a guide for yourself. I don't know. You know, again, it really depends on what are your goals. My goals are I want to see a pretty good cash flow and I want to see a pretty good return on my investment. So My first personal numbers is I like to see about $200 per door in cash flow. Again, this is after all of those expenses are factored in. And so the reason why I like to see this is just because for me, if it's not close to $200 a door, I know I can probably find another deal out there that is. So I like to see at least close to $200 a door. It doesn't be exact, but around that much. The second thing is my cash on cash return. I like to see at least about a 15%. Again, this might be a little bit lower, it might be a little bit higher in cases, but those are my kind of numbers that I go by and when I evaluate a property to decide if it's worth it or not. Okay, and then what do I use? What's the resource I use to run my numbers? I just use a spreadsheet. I created my own spreadsheet. I put everything in there. I kind of tweaked it as I've used it more. And so now I can just punch numbers into a spreadsheet that I've created and it'll show me my cash flow. It'll show me my cash on cash return, all of those things. But, if you don't know if you don't have the know-how how to create your own spreadsheet yet, there's good news because there's resources out there for you. Two resources I would recommend. There's a calculator. It's a free calculator on BiggerPockets. Just go to biggerpockets.com and they have a real estate investor calculator that you can use. It's real basic. They have a version that you can pay for, but you don't have to. That's just if you want all the advanced features. And then the second one is there's an app called Deal Check that I highly recommend. Again, it's a free app. You can do a lot with the free version. You can definitely run all these numbers for free, and I really like that one because it really shows you, it goes into detail about your investment. So now that we've gotten through running our numbers, hopefully you guys have a pretty good idea of what you need to look for when you see a property. So you're not just guessing. When you see a property that you like, you don't just buy it because it looks good or you feel good buying it. It makes sense number-wise. And one thing I learned is that you should never get emotionally attached to a property. I know it's hard to do. I found myself getting attached to several properties in the past that I thank God I didn't get attached to, because if I would have bought it, it would have been a terrible investment. But one thing I learned is if the numbers make sense, the deal makes sense. If the numbers don't make sense, the deal doesn't make sense. It's really that simple. You just have to run your numbers, do the math, and let the math speak for itself. It's the cliche, right? Practice, practice, practice. You have to practice a lot. I recommend practicing every day. Maybe search the MLS, download one of your apps, Redfin, Zillow, Realtor, whatever you want to download, and start going through properties. Maybe start looking in areas that you think you would want to invest in, and just start finding properties and running the numbers on them. Practice it. Start with the 1% rule. See how much they're asking for the property. Maybe it doesn't look like it needs much work, so you don't add much rehab in there. And then start looking to see what your rents might be. And again, you can find all this information online. You can go to sites such as Zillow and look and see what they're asking for rent in certain areas where you're interested. You can go on Facebook Marketplace, see what they're asking in the areas that you want to invest in, and you can get a good idea of what the rents should be based on whether you have a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, whether it's a house or apartment, whatever. Those are things you can use. Those are resources you can use to figure out rents. And you just practice this over and over again. If it meets the 1% rule, or maybe you want to go by the 2% rule. If it meets the 2% rule, comes close, then you pursue it. You start drawing your 4 quadrants and you run your numbers that way. You look to see if maybe it's worth putting an offer on or if you need to pass on it. So again, I would highly recommend practicing this every day for a while before you ever put in an offer on a property. Obviously, there's a lot more to learn too in real estate. If you tune in, I will be putting out a 3rd video pretty soon, probably not till beginning of next week. I'm sorry I've been busy this week. I haven't had a chance to put out any videos, but I will continue to put these out as long as there's interest in them. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to text, call, message me, whatever, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and God bless you.